And a good Sunday morning. It is 100 times more powerful than morphine and 50 times more potent than heroin. The DEA calls fentanyl the single deadliest drug threat our nation has ever encountered. What was once an obscure drug to treat pain in end-stage cancer patients has become the leading cause of death for American adults under the age of 50. When President Richard Nixon launched America's war on drugs 52 years ago, annual overdose deaths stood at 6,771. Last year, overdose deaths rose to more than 110,000. That's almost half the number of Americans who died simply from COVID. And deaths from synthetic opioids, primarily fentanyl, accounted for nearly 70% of those overdose deaths. The opioid overuse epidemic began in the late 90s, driven then by the overprescribing of opioids to treat pain, while drug manufacturers like Purdue Pharma, which has recently paid an $8.3 billion federal settlement in 2020, profited from this problem. By 2010, heroin deaths began rapidly increasing. And then beginning in 2013, it was overdose deaths increasingly involved synthetic opioids like fentanyl. Fentanyl precursor chemicals are made in China and to a lesser extent also in India. And they're shipped to Mexico, where they're then pressed into pills to look like prescription drugs. And it's primarily being done by two powerful drug cartels, Sinaloa and the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. China and Mexico are not willing partners with the United States. China formally severed any counter-narcotics collaboration after then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited the island of Taiwan in 2022. And then last week, the Justice Department filed the first ever charges against Chinese companies they believe are responsible for manufacturing precursor chemicals.
Stopping the Chinese chemical companies that are supplying the cartels with the building blocks they need to manufacture deadly fentanyl. We are targeting every step of the movement, manufacturing, and sale of fentanyl from start to finish.
And U.S.-Mexico cooperation on drug trafficking has collapsed under this current Mexican president, Lopez Obrador, known as AMLO, who has denied that fentanyl is even produced in Mexico. And then he lashed out at the United States for spying and, quote, interference after 28 members of the Sinaloa cartel were charged in April. Last year, the DEA seized over 79 million deadly doses of fentanyl. It's more than double the amount it seized in 2021. And that's enough to supply a lethal dose to every single American. But officials estimate they are capturing maybe just 5 to 10% of the fentanyl that is crossing in from Mexico, and they acknowledge it could even be less than that. The drug is often found in fake pills. It's made to resemble prescription drugs like oxycodone, Xanax, and Adderall. And it's sent through the mail, marketed on the internet and social media, including to children and teens. This is a crisis that the United States has struggled to combat in any meaningful way. Since President Biden took office, his administration has launched a public health campaign known as One Pill Can Kill, warning about the fentanyl threat. And they're introducing new scanning technologies at border crossings. In theory, the fentanyl issue should be way above politics. But with Republican opponents hoping to use the issue as a wedge to blame Biden for border policies, the president has said very little publicly about the crisis.
Fentanyl is killing more than 70,000 Americans a year. You got it.
Obviously, that was from the State of the Union. The reality is that more than 90% of fentanyl seizures along the border this year have been at the legal U.S. ports of entry. And most of those involved with sneaking fentanyl across the border, U.S. citizens. Even the scope of the addiction crisis is not yet clear. More than 9 million Americans misused opioids in 2021, according to the Department of Health and Human Services. And yet the agency has not tracked the rise of fentanyl and does not know how many Americans are even using it. What's clear is that fentanyl is touching every part of American life and every demographic group.
An ex-friend of the family who sold drugs, gave her what she thought was an oxy and took half of it and never woke up. There's no second chances most of the time for fentanyl. You're either going to die or you're going to get addicted. That's just it.
If you know something, you need to say something. And if you can't say it, take care of it.
He had bought some of the blue oxy pills and taken a half of one and died within 1 minute.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.